All right, so you listeners have sent over just a mountain of research on this plastic and health thing. It seems like there's, no matter where you look, there's another headline about how safe the stuff we use every day really is. So get ready to go way beyond the headlines with us today. We're doing a deep dive into the potential health effects of plastic additives. We're talking about the stuff that you find in everything, like food packaging and shower curtains.
Yeah, and wow, you have given us so much to dig into here. It's really quite a lot. The research you sent includes over 1,700 studies from 38 different countries, so this is a serious global concern.
It's a lot to unpack, that's for sure. To help us narrow things down, we're going to focus on three really common plastic additives today: BPA, DEHP, and PBDEs. And get this, some researchers suggest these chemicals could be linked to some really serious health problems.
Yeah, and before we dive into all the specifics of these three, it's super important to remember that just because two things happen at the same time, it doesn't necessarily mean that one directly causes the other one. Scientists are still working to definitively prove a direct link between these specific chemicals and certain health issues, but there's just so much research. And the potential implications are definitely making people stop and think.
Okay, so let's start with BPA. I think most people have probably heard of this one. It's found in a lot of food packaging, especially in things like can linings and some plastic bottles.
Right. And what's really interesting about BPA is that studies have shown a possible connection to heart disease and stroke. And in fact, one study even estimated that in 2015 alone, exposure to BPA could be associated with millions of cases of something called ischemic heart disease.
Ischemic heart disease. Could you break that down a little for those of us who aren't cardiologists?
Oh, of course. Ischemic heart disease means that the arteries in your heart are narrowed or blocked. And that means that blood flow and oxygen to the heart muscle is reduced. And that can lead to some serious things like chest pain, heart attacks, and even heart failure.
So we're talking about some pretty serious stuff here. And
hmm
how many cases of ischemic heart disease were potentially linked to BPA in that study?
Researchers estimated a pretty staggering number, actually, 5.4 million cases. And they also suggested a possible link to 346,000 cases of stroke in that same year.
Wow, those are huge numbers. I mean, what kind of impact would that even have on healthcare systems and the economy as a whole?
Well, if you look at the potential economic burden alone, the study estimated that these BPA-associated health problems could have cost nations around the world about $1 trillion in lost health in 2015.
$1 trillion. I mean,
Yeah.
to put that in perspective, that's more than the entire GDP of many countries. It's crazy to think about all the hidden costs of these chemicals that we often take for granted.
Exactly. And this is only one chemical we're talking about. So let's move on to DEHP, shall we?
Okay, DEHP. What kinds of products is this one hiding in?
Well, DEHP is found in a lot of flexible plastics. Think about things like garden hoses, shower curtains, medical tubing, and even some synthetic leather.
So things that we come into contact with pretty regularly. What's the main concern with DEHP?
DEHP is what's known as an endocrine disruptor. So that means it can interfere with your hormones, and your hormones, as you know, play such a vital role in regulating everything in your body, from growth and development to reproduction and metabolism.
Hormones are powerful stuff. What kind of effects has DEHP been shown to have?
Studies on animals have shown that exposure to DEHP can affect both pregnancy and puberty. And in fact, a 2022 study found a significant link between DEHP and increased mortality rates.
Wait, increased mortality rates. So you're saying that this chemical could be linked to a higher risk of death?
Well, that's what that particular study suggests. The researchers estimated that in 2015, DEHP exposure could be associated with over 164,000 deaths globally. Now, of course, we do need more research to really confirm this link, but it's certainly something to be concerned about.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like something we should be paying attention to. So we've covered BPA and DEHP. What's the third plastic additive we're looking into today?
Let's talk about PBDEs. This is a group of chemicals that are commonly used as flame retardants.
Okay, so flame retardants. That means they're meant to prevent things from catching fire, right?
hmm
So I guess it makes sense in some products. Where are PBDEs usually found?
You'll find them in electronics, car parts, textiles, and even some building materials. But what might surprise you is that they've also been detected in some recycled black plastic, like certain utensils and toys.
Hold on, toys. So you mean we could be exposing our kids to these chemicals just through their toys?
It's a possibility. And the potential impact on brain development is really worrisome. Studies have suggested that maternal exposure to PBDEs could actually be linked to a loss of IQ points in children.
Wait, what? You're saying that these chemicals could potentially affect a child's intelligence?
That's what the research suggests. And one study even estimated that maternal exposure to PBDEs could be responsible for a collective loss of almost 12 million IQ points globally. I mean, to put that in perspective, that's like losing the brain power of an entire city.
That's terrifying. So we've got these three plastic additives, BPA, DEHP, and PBDEs, all potentially linked to some pretty serious health issues.
Okay.
Right, so there's a lot to process. And before we all just completely freak out and throw away all of our plastic, let's just step back for a second and talk about that causation versus correlation thing that you mentioned before.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It is so important to remember that just because two things happen at the same time, it doesn't necessarily mean that one causes the other one. I mean, think of it this way. Ice cream sales and crime rates both tend to increase in the summertime. Does that mean that eating ice cream causes crime?
No, of
Yeah.
course not. There's probably a third factor there, like the hot weather that influences both.
Exactly. It's the same kind of thing with these plastic additives. It's difficult to isolate their impact on health because there are so many other variables involved. For example, people who eat a lot of processed food might have a higher exposure to plastic packaging, but they also might be at a greater risk for certain health problems just because of their diet.
Right, so it's like this tangled web. And scientists are still trying to untangle all the threads to really figure out what's going on.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. But even with all this uncertainty, the potential risks associated with these chemicals are big enough. I mean, they're significant enough that a lot of scientists are really calling for a change in how we regulate them.
So what kind of changes are they actually proposing?
Well, some researchers are arguing for what they're calling a paradigm shift in chemical regulation. They believe that instead of just assuming that chemicals are safe until proven otherwise, that we should actually require manufacturers to prove that a chemical is safe before it's widely used.
Okay, so kind of like how new medications have to go through tons of testing and clinical trials before they're approved.
Exactly. It's a much more cautious approach.
That makes a lot of sense. But I imagine there would be some pushback from the industries that make these chemicals.
Oh, yeah, there probably would be. It's a complex issue with a lot of economic and political implications. But many argue that the potential risks to human health and the environment are just too big to ignore.
Right, so we've talked about the potential risks and how hard it is to prove that one thing actually causes another. But let's get practical for a minute. What can we actually do in our everyday lives to minimize our exposure to these chemicals?
That's the question everyone wants to know. And while we wait for larger scale regulatory changes to happen, there are definitely some steps you can take to reduce your contact with these additives.
Okay, cool. So let's start with BPA. What are some easy ways to cut back on that?
One really simple step is to just choose fresh or frozen fruits and veggies over canned varieties whenever you can. BPA is often used in those can linings, especially for acidic foods like tomatoes.
So ditch the canned peaches and grab some fresh ones. Got it. What about all the plastic containers we use to store our leftovers in?
Switching to glass containers is a great way to reduce your exposure to both BPA and DEHP.
Glass it is. Okay, what about those black plastic utensils that are everywhere these days? Are those a concern?
That's where PBDEs can be a problem.
Mhm.
While the black plastic itself isn't necessarily bad, some recycled black plastic might contain PBDEs. They were used as flame retardants in the original products.
So how can we tell which black plastic is safe and which might have PBDEs in it?
Well, unfortunately, it's not always easy to tell. If you're really concerned, choosing utensils made from other materials like stainless steel or wood is a safer bet.
Okay, good to know. So we've covered the kitchen. What about the bathroom? It seems like there's plastic everywhere in there. Shower curtains, shampoo bottles, even rubber duckies.
Yep, and you're right. DEHP is found in a lot of those flexible plastic bathroom products. Choosing a fabric shower curtain or one made from another material could help reduce your exposure. Same goes for opting for glass or metal containers for shampoos and lotions.
So it seems like it's all about just being aware of the materials we use and the products we're buying.
Exactly. It's about making informed choices and taking a proactive approach to protecting your health.
Right. What about toys for kids? Should we be worried about those recycled black plastic toys that might contain PBDEs?
Well, when it comes to children's products, I think it's always better to be safe than sorry. Choosing toys made from natural materials like wood or organic fabrics can help minimize the risk.
It kind of seems like we're talking about a pretty big lifestyle change here. I mean, it's not just about swapping out a few plastic containers. It's about rethinking our relationship with plastic in general.
You hit the nail on the head. It's not about demonizing all plastic. It's about understanding the potential risks that are associated with some of these additives and then making choices to reduce those risks
Right, and this goes way beyond what we do as individuals, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we also need bigger changes in how these chemicals are regulated.
Absolutely. Remember how we discussed earlier that a lot of people are calling for stricter regulations? They believe that we need to make the manufacturers prove their chemicals are safe before they can sell them.
Yeah, it's a big change from how things are now, where chemicals are basically innocent until proven guilty,
Yeah.
even if that proof comes at the cost of our health.
That's a debate that's definitely gaining momentum, and it raises some important questions about our priorities.
Yeah, for sure. So we've talked about the potential risks and the challenges of proving causation, and we've also talked about some ways to minimize our exposure to these chemicals. What's the one thing you want our listeners to walk away with today?
I think the most important thing is that knowledge is power. The more we understand about these chemicals, the better choices we can make for ourselves and our families.
That's a really great point. This deep dive has definitely given me a lot to think about. I'm already looking at my plastic water bottle a little differently. But really, it's empowering to know that we're not just helpless victims in all of this. We can actually do things to protect ourselves and make our voices heard. So it feels like we've just scratched the surface here, you know? I'm curious, what are some of the big questions that scientists are still trying to figure out when it comes to all these plastic additives and their impact on our health?
Well, one of the biggest challenges is really understanding those long-term effects of exposure to these chemicals, especially in low doses. A lot of the studies that are out there have focused on acute exposure, so that means high levels over a really short time period. But what happens when you're exposed to small amounts, low levels over years or even decades? That's really what researchers are trying to figure out.
It's like that saying, right? The dose makes the poison. I mean, even water can be harmful if you drink way too much of it all at once.
Exactly. And it's really the same with these chemicals. The amount you're exposed to and for how long, those are both really important factors. And another thing researchers are looking into is how these chemicals interact with each other. I mean, it's not like we're only exposed to one chemical at a time, right? It's more like a whole cocktail of different chemicals every day. So figuring out how they might work together or even against each other is really important.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like solving this giant puzzle where all the pieces are constantly moving and bumping into each other.
Uh-huh. Yeah, that's a great way to think about it. And then you add in individual genetics and different lifestyles, and it gets even more complicated because those can change how our bodies react to the chemicals too.
So it's not one size fits all when it comes to this stuff.
Yeah.
What might be harmful to one person might not affect someone else the same way.
Exactly. And that's why we need to be really careful about making big generalizations. We really need a lot more research to figure out all these individual differences so we can understand the risks for each person.
So it sounds like there's still a lot we don't know about all this. But even with all these questions out there, is there enough evidence to say we should be taking action now?
I think that's a personal decision everyone has to make for themselves. But personally, I believe that the precautionary principle is a good approach. Basically, if there's a chance something could be harmful to people's health, it's better to be safe than sorry.
That makes sense.
Mm.
So what can people do to stay informed about this stuff and make those safer choices? I mean, it can feel pretty overwhelming to think about researching every single product you buy, right?
Oh yeah, definitely. It's easy to get overwhelmed. But don't let that stop you from doing anything. Just start small. Start paying attention to those labels on the products you buy. Look for things like BPA-free or phthalate-free, and support companies that are upfront about their ingredients and how they make their products.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point. You know, as consumers, we have a lot of power. We can choose to support businesses that are doing things the right way.
Yeah. Exactly. And don't forget about the power of just talking about these issues. Talk to your friends and family. Let your elected officials know that these things are important to you and that you want them to support stricter rules and regulations. Every little thing you do helps.
So what's the one thing you want everyone listening to remember from our deep dive today?
I'd say stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged. The more we all learn about how these plastic additives can affect our health, the better we'll be able to protect ourselves and fight for a healthier future.
I love that. Well, this has been a really interesting deep dive into the world of plastic additives, and kind of scary, to be honest. But we've learned a lot about the potential risks they pose and how tricky it can be to prove for sure that they cause those problems. And most importantly, we've talked about some things we can all do to protect ourselves.
It's definitely a complicated topic, no easy answers, but I hope this deep dive has given you the knowledge to start making more informed choices for yourself and your family, and to join in the bigger conversation about how we can create a healthier world for everyone.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us today, everyone. We'll leave you with this thought. What's one thing you can do today to reduce your own exposure to plastic additives? Remember, even the smallest changes can add up to make a big difference. Until next time, keep asking questions, keep learning, and keep diving deep with us.